Should Miami of Ohio be in the NCAA tournament? Yes. And this shouldn't even be close. This should be a universally agreed on opinion. You know why? Because we're 31-0. If you look at every other undefeated college basketball team in the regular season ever, the whole tournament era, okay? Indiana State 1979, UNLV 1990, Wichita State 2014, Kentucky 2015. What do all four of those teams have in common? They were all 1 seeds. Every single one of them. And all of them, with the exception of Kentucky, were mid-majors. They played really easy schedules. So we're going to ask the question, why on earth is Miami of Ohio a first 4 team? At least that's where they're projected. And all those other teams were 1 seeds. How does that even work? Earlier this year, Utah State played Memphis about a month ago. Utah State won the game 99-75. You're probably wondering, where on earth am I going with this? Why are you bringing this game up? This seems irrelevant. With 28 seconds to go, Utah State scored 3 baskets, and they're already up 20+. I can't show you the footage due to copyright reasons, but you can go back and look it up. In other words, they're running up the score. Penny Hardaway got really mad, which makes sense. And then after the game, Jared Calhoun, Utah State's head coach, was asked, why are you doing that? You're already up 20+. A lot of people would deem that disrespectful. And he said, paraphrasing here, Ken Pom likes that. What does he mean by that? This is what we're going to talk about. From 1981, and then for decades, the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee had a metric called RPI. RPI, for those of you that don't know, is based on 2 things: your wins and losses and who you played, your strength of schedule. Miami of Ohio is currently ranked 28th in that metric. That would give them a 7 seed. So in other words, they'd be a shoo-in to the NCAA tournament. There wouldn't even be a debate if this was taking place in 2003. But in 2019, the NCAA invented a metric called the net rating. The net rating is a combination of 2 different metrics, okay? 50% of it is based on RPI, so who you played, your record. 50% of it is based on predictive metrics, Ken Pom, which is not if you won the game or not, how much you won by and who you played. Miami of Ohio is sitting at 64th in the net. That's a huge difference from RPI. Okay, why? Miami of Ohio is number 1 in the country in win percentage, yet they're 23rd in scoring margin. They've won a lot of close games this year. So Ken Pom, 50% of the net, is saying, you're getting lucky. You're winning a lot of close games. You shouldn't be undefeated. Based on how easy your schedule is, you should be beating these teams by more, and you're not. So we're not going to properly reward you. We don't think you're that good of a team, in other words. Miami of Ohio is 93rd in Ken Pom. That would be the lowest rated Ken Pom team to get in the NCAA tournament as an at-large in the history of the tournament. All of it. So we have a really interesting thing going on here, because RPI thinks that Miami of Ohio is good enough to win 1, maybe 2 tournament games. Okay, then you have the net, which thinks that Miami of Ohio is an NIT team. I don't know who's blowing up my phone here. Anyway. And then you have Ken Pom, which thinks that they're not even good enough to make the NIT. So 3 metrics that the selection committee relies very heavily upon are spitting out 3 completely different conclusions. So as a result, you turn on First Take, you listen to Bruce Pearl, and you see them say things like, well, they haven't played a hard schedule. Well, they barely beaten these teams. They've been super close. They should be blowing them out. And so as a result, we have a really, really interesting debate. And so here's what I view on it. Here's my view. If Miami of Ohio played Auburn, we're going to go back to Bruce Pearl's comments. I think Auburn would win. I think Auburn's the better team. I think Ken Palm would completely agree with me, but bear with me here. What I just said is a subjective claim. You know what's objective? 31-0. Miami of Ohio won 31 games and lost 0 in the regular season. Auburn was near 500 this season, 17-16. That's objective. That is an objective claim. It doesn't matter what I think because you have the facts right there. And going back to the whole Ken Palm ratings inception, when Ken Palm, I can't talk. When Ken Palm created his ratings, he didn't do it to evaluate which team should be in the tournament to nitpick resumes. He did it to predict games. In other words, he did it to hypothesize the hypothetical. I know that's a tongue twister. But here's my question. Why are we using predictive, hypothetical-based metrics to evaluate absolute results? That's my question with the net. We have the results. We have the wins and losses right here. And as far as I know, you play to win the game. Unless if you're Utah State. But every other team in the country, yes. So you know what? Because of that, I believe we should get rid of the net. Because this shows a major, Miami of Ohio shows a major flaw in the net. And, you know, it would be a different thing if the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee said, we're getting rid of garbage time. That's it. We're done. So we're going to pick teams based on how much you win by and who you play. So play every possession like it's your last because every single possession is going to be evaluated. If they went out and said that, okay, that changes things, but they haven't. So you have garbage time as an existence, which I think really hurts the net because scoring margin becomes a little bit more gray than just a black and white number. But that hasn't been told yet. The committee hasn't said that. So why are we using predictive metrics? Are predictive metrics more accurate at evaluating how good teams actually are? Yes, I believe they are. There's a reason why sportsbooks use Ken Palm ratings over RPI ratings to determine spreads. There just is. But Ken Palm didn't create these metrics to organize the absolute. He created it to hypothesize the hypothetical. That's the facts. And we're using these metrics for things that they weren't meant to be used for. And as a matter of fact, I'd argue that using predictive metrics to evaluate resumes just takes a lot of the soul out of the game. It just does. Like, I think you're hurting the sport because you have teams playing for something a little bit different than just trying to win the game. Like, imagine this. Oh, gosh. I hope we don't ever get to this. I don't think we will. Imagine UNC beats Duke, okay? And you ask the player after the game in this hypothetical scenario, they beat him by 20. And he says, oh, gosh, yes, we won by 20. Our Ken Palm rating is going to be so much better. It's going to be so good. Doesn't that suck? Like, doesn't that suck that we've sort of minimized the value of winning the game and slugging it out for an analytical power rating? It takes the soul out of the game. Sure, predictive metrics, in the end of the day, they are more accurate at showing you how good teams actually are. I believe that, but that is subjectivity. And at what point are we going to stop hyper-focusing on efficiency and productivity and focus on authenticity? You play to win the game. You don't play to get a high analytical power rating. It just sucks. And I think Miami of Ohio is not a shoo-in. They should be. But they're not a shoo-in because of a flawed system. They've done what they've needed to do to make the NCAA tournament. And if Miami of Ohio makes the NCAA tournament, will I be betting against them? Potentially. I probably would be. But does that matter? Should that make them miss the tournament? Heck no. Because that's a subjective claim. So Miami of Ohio is the victim of a flawed system.